Hello, and thank you for joining us on Climate Check. Now, today we're coming to you from Panuka Farms. Now, if you do not know what Panuka Farms is, this is a location where the Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris, visited when she came to Zambia. And we're privileged and honored to be here today on the show to talk to the Managing Director and Founder of Panuka Farms, and this is Mr. Bruno Mweemba. Now, I'm interested in this location, obviously, because on Climate Check, we are all about environmental protection, and his business model for this farm is climate smart agriculture. We'll be talking to him in a short while.
Panuka Farming Enterprise started in about 2017. Of course, the land was bought way back, but I think to conceptualize it as a farm, as a business, that was in 2017. And so we started, obviously, with the setup of what we call base infrastructure, irrigation, the fencing and all other amenities that really amount to base infrastructure for the farm, which took us quite a while. And I think we still, putting together some infrastructure, going, forward. But the way we conceptualize, I think the farming enterprise basically arises from some of my, past, work. I worked for a research institute called IAPRI at some point for actually about 5 years. I used to be the director of finance. And one of the issues that actually emerged were around horticulture and the fact that most of the locals were having issues with getting into some of the formalized markets for high value horticulture products, and I think that crystallized into three things. One being the issue of quality, and then the second issue being the issue of quantity. People may have the right quality, but then they don't have the quantum that is required by some of these off-takers like chain stores. And then the third aspect was actually the issue of consistency. So I actually do coin these as the QQC, that's the quality, quantity, and consistency. So that basically I think was the main issue why we established Panuka Enterprise, with hope of basically serving Mother Zambia from this tag of failing to meet these three holy grails, I think, in this space. Okay. Mainly we focus on what I call high value horticulture products, but this was driven by my own research and also interactions with the chain stores. We actually primarily looked at import substitution, getting to the chain stores, understanding what are some of the value chains where they were having issues, where they had to import most of these products. And also the fact that I'm an environmental finance person, I was also looking at reducing the carbon footprint of the food that would travel all the way from South Africa and other places into Zambia. So the focus on what we grow here, mostly on the salads end, was as a result of that interaction with the chain stores. These are the products that we've traditionally, imported, and we just wanted to make sure that we reduce the carbon footprint of those, value chains, but also just guarantee, good stuff, fresh, produce that shouldn't travel kilometers to get to people's, tables. So our business model at the moment is actually business to business. We don't do retail, so we much more into bulk, production and supply. So mainly our target is chain stores, but we're also now supplying the mine houses in Northwestern. So mainly we're not into retail. Our focus is bulk, production and offtake.
The way farming has been done through millennia, it is called agroecology.
Currently, the charcoal production levels have gone extremely high.
Climate compatibility actually takes a number of actors to actually accept the act.
Because climate change is really affecting the most vulnerable in society.
Zambia has signed a memorandum of understanding with the EU to forge forest partnerships.
We would like, in this new relationship and the climate change challenges that we have, to gravitate to more of investments focused around value addition.
Has COP27 delivered on its agenda?
The message is that we'll continue pushing to actualize all the agreements we've made at COP27.
So firstly, tell me where we are here. What's going on here?
So where we are here is an English, cucumber, crop, which is one of the major, crops that we grow here. And it's just a couple of, weeks old. It takes around 60 days for you to actually do what we call the first, cut. So we have our team in the background that is just, doing what we call trellising, take up the crop, I think, up. Because by its nature, this is quite a very tender, crop that needs to be assisted, going up. But I think what is critical is also to understand that this is quite a very delicate, crop. If you actually do it in open field, you might not get, the productivity that we get in this kind of environment. By the way, I think in our history of farming, this is probably the most expensive seed you get. I think just to do this greenhouse alone would cost you roughly about 10,000 kwacha just on seed. Just for a population of about 1,000. Okay. So it's not a cheap crop, and that's the more reason you need to bring it in an environment where it maximizes the possibility of growth, so that you don't lose on that investment. But again, this kind of setup, a greenhouse, enables this crop to thrive. I'm sure you can actually feel the heat in here. So that environment is actually very good, coupled with other, technologies like the precision, irrigation, that makes this crop to kind of thrive. It's always said that women have magic, fingers, and indeed, even from an agricultural perspective, like I said, this is a very tender, crop which requires tender hands, and so obviously, with the intent, obviously, on women empowerment, all our greenhouses are actually dedicated to women. So we have men, of course, but then they do other duties on the farm. But 3/4, actually 100% of the work that goes on in our greenhouses is actually looked after by the ladies. And what is critical also is to understand that besides the technical team of the ladies, so like one, we have a field supervisor in here. But then the rest of the women that work with her deliberately actually recruited from within the community, so that it's part of the CSR responsibility of this farm to make sure that we get the workforce from within the area that surrounds the farm. You need to appreciate the investment that goes into farming. So just like any other project, likely part of my background is actually project finance. But you need to understand that you've got to invest first in infrastructure before you can actually begin to reap any form of money. And I think it's taken us almost 3 to 4 years to really just build the infrastructure, because this environment, to be precise, costs you around $20 per square meter in terms of the infrastructure. So just this would cost you roughly about $6,000, just one. And then when you look at how many we've had to invest in, it's quite costly. So it takes quite a while. It pushes back, I think, the payback period. So yes, like you indicated, we still have issues with the cost of most of this infrastructure, like greenhouses, irrigation equipment, which then pushes the returns on such an enterprise. So we're still limping ourselves, but it's just that I think we understand that farming, as it were, it's a long-term investment, and we remain hopeful that there's good years coming along the way. Yeah.
Let's understand climate smart agriculture, because I've observed here, having walked through various parts of your farm, I have seen there's precision farming going on here, and segmented areas, smaller portions, but looks like the yield is really huge.
We've themed this farm around kind of environmental protection. And it's actually themed around what we call the food, energy, water, nexus. If you look at the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, and also the strategy that we have on deforestation, check the statistics there. We're actually losing around 300,000, hectares of forest, per annum. And one of the major drivers of that is actually agriculture, extensification. So in the quest for people to actually increase their productivity, people are actually opening up more, land, which then exacerbates, deforestation. the concept that we have here is to farm on a smaller, piece of, land, but then bring in a few low-hanging kind of technologies, greenhouses, and a few other, technologies to try and beef up the productivity. But then you're farming on a smaller, piece of land that doesn't exacerbate, the deforestation, angle. That's one bit. And then when it comes to the water, bit of that, nexus. We're trying to be a bit more precise in the way we use the water, hence bringing in things like, drip irrigation. But as you see also, we're actually trying to harvest, water from the rooftops of these greenhouses. And then we have a reservoir that, we'll be completing. That way then we relieving, the water aquifers, from being, excess, abstraction. That way then there's kind of reticulation and then there's conservation of water in the process. Then the third component of that nexus is the energy bit. When we conceptualized this farm around 2017, that's the time we had one of the worst, forms of load shedding in the country. But also you'll find that much as now, load shedding seems to have, become a thing of the past. But then most of these farms are actually in rural setups where the grid does not reach. But even then, when you get to ZESCO to try and just electrify a farm such as this one, it will cost you an arm and leg. And so from that deliberate perspective, we have gone renewable energy 100%. We use solar for all our farm operations. Besides me, obviously being a farmer, I'm an environmental, finance, expert who plays in the international, space, and I cover quite a number of countries, I think, in this space. And I have also advised, and with the U.S. government. Quite recently, I think I was interacting on the Millennium Challenge, cooperation that will be targeting, agriculture, and I think it's these kind of issues that I think this Millennium Challenge, compact is trying to look at, the impact of, how do you basically climate-proof, agriculture so that you improve your productivity, you de-risk on the impact of climate change, and obviously being in that space and the fact that we're kind of walking the talk, I think on this front. Obviously attracted, I think, the U.S. government. Obviously, I mean, it was quite an incredible, visit. That's the U.S. Vice President we're talking about. So, yeah, that was good feeling. But obviously, that came with quite a lot of challenges to, just set up, get ready, but also rise to the, occasion and represent Mother Zambia. And hopefully, we did justice on that front. But basically, it was just to showcase some of, the deliberate steps that we've taken to try and, climate-proof our production, so that we are in production, all year round. And I think the strides that we've made, around climate-proofing our production, has actually enabled us to, be in production all year round. So we are not a seasonal, kind of, farm. So that's a very critical component. But one thing I also wanted to indicate is that when you talk about climate proofing, there's high-end, technologies out there. But I think our aim is to try and pick what I call low-hanging, fruits of climate proofing technology that would be more feasible for an average, farmer out there, because there's no point in really going high-tech, and then people just admire, but then they can't really be inspired, in a position where they can actually do it. So we're not, kind of using utopian high-end, climate-proofing technologies like heating up the greenhouses. I mean, this is Africa. Climate is already good, but then all we're doing is to try and enhance that so that we beef up the productivity. So that's basically, I think, the concept around, how we're doing things, and that's basically how the USV, kind of got interested to just appreciate how that works out. Yeah, organic farming I think is one way of cutting costs, but also it's just good for nature. On the cost side, obviously, I think you can see the Russian-Ukraine war and the impact on the fertilizers, especially the nitrate, fertilizers. So when you go organic, obviously, then you kind of, de-risk, on the cost, escalation. We've just started trials, and the crop that you're actually seeing here is the second, trial that we're doing, which is doing quite well, on the organic end. And then we'll keep trying. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is what are some of these kind of alternative organic, fertilizers, what's the efficacy, and then the impact on, productivity. That is still a huge challenge in terms of just large scale, use of these organic fertilizers. I think it's still a bit of a challenge. So there's still quite a lot of trials that we still need to go through. Because if you talked about also greening, say the Farmer Input Support Program, what technology are we going to use? And are we guaranteed of the yields and stuff like that? So it's still something that I would call work in progress, but I think we need to transition in that manner for nature, but also to cut on costs. Access to finance is a very critical enabler to a farming enterprise. And I tell people that we need to avoid giving each other what I call lullaby messages, that you don't need money to farm. You actually need quite a lot of money if you want to farm big. A setup like ours doesn't come cheap, and thanks to some of our financing partners like the World Bank, that put some seed into transitioning us towards climate proofing, and then we had some additional resources from the Zambia Industrial Commercial Bank that recently also injected some money. But I think government must be a bit more deliberate, targeted to some of the young people and those that are also have shown that they've got the appetite to do this. Because if you provide some of these resources generically, for people who don't even have the interest, and you can't see the proof of concept, you find that it actually goes in the drain. So if we can smoothen, I think, access to finance, obviously there's still quite a few challenges with the Citizens Economic Empowerment Commission in terms of access. If that could be streamlined and then targeted at some of these projects that have actually shown that they've gone past proof of concept, all they need is now scale up, I think that would go a long way. But besides that also, there's quite a huge mindset shift that we need to do on the young ones. Funny enough, we do provide we run actually a graduate trainee program here. And I can tell you, there are young ones who turn down, a graduate trainee opportunity because they hear there's no electricity here. They can't be in a rural setup. So somehow there's this utopian thinking that you can do farming in Cairo Road. So there's a radical mindset shift that we need to do on the young ones to understand that farming happens out there in the soil, sometimes in rural areas. But then once we provide that information, beyond that, I think the access to finance and all the other aspects, downstream, like logistics, and obviously access to market becomes a big one. I must just indicate that with access to market, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because certain markets also want you to show that you'll be consistent in production, you provide the right quality and quantity. So it's one thing to complain about the markets, but then the issue is that when you're given the market opportunity, do you rise to the occasion?
After the break, we will take you to another location where we will be discussing more issues around activities going on here at Panuka Farms. It's of interest to us on Climate Check because it is a model that is focused on protecting the environment and, of course, making sure that adaptation to climate change is a reality. We'll be back on the other side.
The way farming has been done through millennia, it is called agroecology.
Currently, the charcoal production levels have gone extremely high.
Climate compatibility actually takes a number of actors to accept the act.
Because climate change is really affecting the most vulnerable in society.
Zambia has signed a memorandum of understanding with the EU to forge forest partnerships.
We would like, in this new relationship and the climate change challenges that we have, to gravitate to more of investments focused around value addition.
Has COP27 delivered on its agenda?
The message is that we'll continue pushing to actualize all the agreements we've made at COP27.
So in here we have iceberg lettuce, which is one of our core, crops that we grow on this farm. But in the greenhouses, you actually see that we use it as a rotational crop. given that the cost of the greenhouse, like we indicated, would cost you roughly about $20 per square meter. So you want to make sure that in the greenhouse you've got a much, more valuable, crop. Obviously, lettuce is, but in this environment, in the shade net, it actually thrives quite well, and that you can actually see, given that there's no direct, sunlight on it. But also the fact that, when you look at the insect, infestation, because of the fact that it's got, a shade net on the side, I think that also makes it, to thrive. But one thing also from an adaptation, climate adaptation, angle, this is a very delicate, crop. Once you get to rain season proper, you can't really do it in open field. It rots very easily, and that's why we've got different, growing, environments, from open field to shade nets, and then you've got the greenhouses, obviously at the higher echelon. So that's the iceberg lettuce, that crop that we have in here. So around in here we have roughly about 2,400 heads, grown at about 40 centimeters in terms of just the plant spacing. Most of the fertigation is actually done through the drips, and obviously irrigation again is quite precise. And what you observe, I think, with this crop is the evenness in growth, because of the fact that our irrigation is also quite very precise. Including the nutrition. That's very critical, because in other fields you find that there's a bit of bumpy, wavy, growth, pattern. But what you want is to make sure that your irrigation and nutrition is really on point, so that you get an even, crop. When it's ready, it's already, get it out, and then you're on to the next crop.
Now, after an interesting, comprehensive tour of Panuka Farms and understanding what goes on here, I've been to the greenhouses, I've been to the sheds, I've seen green pepper, yellow pepper, red pepper, cucumbers, lettuce, and many other crops. I'm satisfied that it is possible to actually grow crops in an organic manner for commercial purposes. What is stopping you? Thank you for watching Climate Check. Bye for now.